actually started. And I think, yes, it worked. So perfect. And with this, I will just continue to the next slide, which is just a topic for Andreas. So design MuleSoft application with operations in mind. And I will hand over to Andreas for his presentation.
All right, thank you. So I'll be sharing my screen. So maybe regarding the questions, please write all the questions into the chat. We will then pick them up at the end of the presentation. I hope that's okay for you. I will be switching from one window to another. I hope it doesn't disturb you. Otherwise, Kai, please let me know, because I don't see like the BV window if I'm doing the presentation.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, quickly about me. I'm Andreas. I'm a technical architect at MuleSoft, based in Zurich, in the professional services team. So I help customers, but as well as partners implementing MuleSoft projects. Before we start with the real content, I'm going to have a few Kahoot questions to make it a little bit more interactive. So if you have a phone or if you are sitting on your laptop, please go to kahoot.it and type in this game pin. And then you should give it a name. Yeah, here you should see your name with an avatar. I'm not sure if you can even choose this avatar. I don't think so. But ideally, we should see like everybody who is attending the meetup then also in this Kahoot game.
Hendrik just has an issue hearing Andreas. I can hear Andreas. Maybe yeah, confirm that everything is fine here, the chat. Otherwise, Hendrik just needs to reconnect, I guess. Okay, he can hear me, but he can't hear you.
Okay, that's really strange. Can you guys hear me, or everybody else?
Okay.
Okay.
So, okay, everyone can hear you. Please, Hendrik.
Yeah. All right, everybody, take the last chance to add your pin into Kahoot. We have 12 people at the moment. We have 24 in the call, so maybe a few more. Otherwise, I will start it. Now we have Kai, 13. So,
okay, now the audio works for Hendrik.
Perfect. Perfect. Now Hendrik is here as well. So, all right. So I'm going to ask you a few questions then in the Kahoot as well. But before we start, I will give you 2 example questions just for you guys to see how this Kahoot works. So let's start it. The first question is, where are you currently? Just to see the different locations. And now you should be able to type in an answer either on your phone or on in your browser. And then the answer should pop up here on this window. Seven answers. I'm going to wait until we have everybody. 12. All right, cool. All right, Toronto, Canada, Madrid.
Cool.
A lot of from Croatia, Hamburg. All right. Okay, another question before we start. What is your current job role? I'm wondering if we have more like technical people, business people, architects, developers. 9 answers. If you are missing, so if we have all the answers, it will then directly skip to the next page. 11, 12, 13. All right. What do we have? Solution architects, director, Mule. So if this is a job role, I don't know. Developers, okay. So mainly technical people, which is great. All right. Good. Then let's jump into the presentation. Quickly to the agenda. So I will be starting with why is operations, what is operations and why is it important? Give you an overview about what I consider to be operations. I understand there are different views, and probably if you ask other people, they have other definitions. So please keep in mind, this is all, I would say, my opinion. Then the second part will be how to design integrations with operations in mind, because operations already starts in the design phase, ideally, and not after the go live. Otherwise, it will be a little bit difficult. And then finally, as a wrap up, I will give you an operations best practice guide. So basically summing, like aggregating all the best practices which I have to have at least a minimum what you need to consider in the operations before the go live. All right, so before we start with what is operations, I would like to know from you guys, and you can go back to the code, what does operations mean to you? I mean, you have probably worked on the projects, type in what is operations for you. Do you consider it already in the design? Is it more like troubleshooting? I'm wondering, what do you guys think? One answer. The answer. It's maybe a little bit.
I think it's.
Yeah, I should increase it, but I think this should be fine at least to begin with. Keep the system alive. Okay. Where the APIs live, people who monitor. Monitoring applications, troubleshooting, a very big part, support, maintenance, technical process. Yeah. All right. So in my definition, I mean, if we look into a normal software development lifecycle, we have usually the first part, which is the design phase. And then at some point we start with the development, with the testing, and then with the deployment, right? And on a certain date, we have a go live where we take all our applications into the production, and then the operation phase begins, right? And the first phase from design until deployment should be really iterative. So you probably know it if you have already built MuleSoft APIs. So it doesn't stop after the go live. It's more like a continuous improvement of our API product. And then on a certain date, we take it live, and then the operation starts. And what I have seen on, I would probably even say on most of my projects, is that operations is not very easy, or it has a lot of challenges. And we probably all know it. Before the go live, we have a lot of time pressure. So the first priority we have is basically to take our applications on a certain date into production, right? And we start neglecting the operations before we go live. What I have also seen a lot of times is that there is no operations team somehow at the customer. Usually they think, okay, the developers are going to do that, the architects are going to do that, but there is no dedicated operations team, which should be the case in an ideal world. Sometimes we even have proper logging or monitoring. I mean, we have some logging, you know it from the MuleSoft applications, but we don't have useful logs in order to properly troubleshoot. Because depending on how you basically design the logs, if you are using a logging framework, etc., it will change really how you are going to troubleshoot at the end. If you don't consider that in the beginning, you're going to have a lot of challenges as well. And it should be also before the go live some kind of an operations handover. So the developers or the architects should basically tell the operations colleagues, okay, this is how you need to operate at the end the applications, or how you need to keep them alive, how we saw as we saw before in one of the answers. So usually there are a lot of challenges, right? And if I speak about operations, I mean, all your definitions have been right, because in my opinion, operations is a very big topic. And I just put down here a few boxes on what I would consider operations, but there are probably much more, right? If we start on the top left corner, I mean, very crucial, monitoring and logging. We need to have some kind of monitoring, some kind of logging in order to ensure that our integrations are smoothly running. But then the entire incident management, a very big topic, right? So if we have an error, if we have an incident, what happens afterwards? Who is taking care of it, that the messages are maybe reprocessed? Who is taking care of it, that the bug or the error or what we ever see in the logging is then getting fixed, which is then going into the topic of incident management. The entire performance management would also fall into the operations part. So basically tracking how our applications are behaving under heavy load. Do we see any like peaks? Do we need to change something in our resource allocation? This will be also tracked by operations. Security maintenance of our integration. So if we have any kind of security issues, can be tracked by operations. Demand planning, scaling planning. If we track our applications, we can also feedback. We can get feedback on if we should basically scale up our applications to have them smoothly running. Documentation, for me, very important. I know that most of the developers don't like to write documentation, and I also see a lot of not updated documentations. But if you want to properly troubleshoot, the solution designs or how the integrations are documented should be a living document, right? Because only if you know what you basically what the solution design is, you can then also fix it properly at the end. It might also be user support, so supporting end users from the operation perspective, and also managing the versions and the updates. If we have a deprecated API, if we are going to a new version, this should be communicated with operations as well to ensure that everything runs smoothly. And like the entire operations process is a continuous improvement, right? I mean, it doesn't stop somewhere and it doesn't start somewhere. It's really a continuous improvement, which is never stopping. So as said, this is a very big topic. And usually if you start a project, I would say with MuleSoft, I'm not a fan of having a big bang. Like it's not in operations or not even in CI/CD or whatever. I truly believe that you cannot cover everything directly in the beginning. So what I really like to do is I like maturity models, right? Where we basically say, okay, when we start a project, those are the most important things which we should take care of. If we have set this base, we can grow from there, right? But those crucial things in the beginning of our maturity model are at least the things which we should have. And I try to draw the same for operations. So if we start on the very bottom left corner, very crucial for me for a go live is first of all monitoring and logging, but also incident management, right? And those two parts, in my opinion, is something which we absolutely need in order to go live with our applications and in order also to troubleshoot our applications. Because if we don't have any monitoring, if we don't have any logging, we are basically blind what our applications are doing. And if we don't have any kind of proper incident management, nobody resolves the errors which we have, and it could be that we have messages which are lost, right? And if we go up the maturity model then to the top right corner, I would say those are all the add-ons which we then can add over time, like the docs, the security, the performance management. But I would say it's more like a continuous improvement process, which you can build up with, but at least the monitoring and the logging and the incident management are for sure things which you need to have before you go live. All right. So before we go into the next topic of really designing and having now the first overview about operations, I would like to go back to Kahoot. And yeah, please maybe be a little bit faster this time because it's still on 30 seconds if I'm not wrong. So what would you consider in the design phase to achieve good operations? So what would you consider directly in the beginning when you design your integrations to have really good operations at the end? Maybe I can. Yeah, the time is still 8 answers. Okay. NGMS, yeah, it's a good tool to to trace everything. Documentation, absolutely. Testing, yeah. I mean, yeah, ideally testing should be done always. Knowing what log, yeah, knowing probably what logging systems you are using or what kind of logs you have to look into it. Proper error handling, very good. Best practices on logging and error handling. Yeah. So yeah, logging and error handling are actually the two topics I'm going to speak about. So you're definitely going into the right directions. Let me go here. So I won't be able to cover all the different boxes which you see here. So I will be focusing on monitoring and logging due to the time. But please keep in mind that, I mean, all the other boxes are as well as important for the operations part. So monitoring and logging. I usually differentiate between two parts. So this is first of all the functional monitoring and the non-functional monitoring. What I consider as functional monitoring is basically are the applications which we'll build, are they meeting the specific requirements which have been designed, right? Like everything, are the applications fulfilling the business functionality at the end? Examples for it can be like successful transactions, but also business errors. I also put in there the API health check, so basically checking if the application is really running or not. And then on the other side, we have everything which is non-functional, and this goes more into the direction of really application performance. So do we have, are we somehow monitoring the CPUs of the applications, the memory? Also, are we monitoring some kind of security metrics? So this is basically really the infrastructure which we have available for all our applications. And ideally, before the go live, we should at least monitor both of it. So what kind of possibilities do we have? And I won't go into all the tools which MuleSoft offers, because there are quite a lot. I'm really mentioning, I would say, the tools which I usually consider as mandatory before a customer wants to take the applications into production. So on the left-hand side, regarding the functional monitoring, we have the AnyPoint functional monitor, which you have probably seen. So you can then configure, based on your requirements, some kind of basic functional monitoring for the APIs. And what I always recommend is implementing a health check endpoint for the applications. You see an example here of the error response. So this is a good possibility to basically check, is at least the application running, and what kind of version do we have it running? And I also recommend to add a timestamp to it. And this gives us the flexibility to do health checks all over all our API in order to check if they are really running or not. What I really find also useful for functional monitoring are regression tests. There might be different philosophies if you should really run regression tests or functional tests on production environment. I truly believe it makes sense, and I often use Karate Labs. I don't know if you know that, but it's basically an open source framework in order to test the APIs. And you can run them on a regular basis. On here, you just see an overview about like different APIs where we are basically checking some resources and also the health check of the APIs. And it gives you a good indication if the APIs are still functionally running, right? So if you see some, I don't know, failed test scenarios or so, you might need to look into it. But at least for the health check endpoints, I really find it a really useful tool in order to run it on a regular basis. There are a lot of other possibilities in order to run regression or functional tests as well, like tools. And this is just one example of it. Regarding the non-functional monitoring, this depends a little bit also on your deployment model. So if you have everything deployed on CloudHub, you can configure your alerts there. If you have it on your own infrastructure, you might have other possibilities which you can then configure on your own infrastructure to basically monitor all the non-functional topics. What we usually recommend before a go live are 4 different alerts which should be configured. 3 of them are the most crucial ones, which you can see here on the left side. So we usually recommend please monitor the CPU usage. You see here one example. I mean, if it's above 80% for at least 10 minutes, please do that. Monitor the memory usage. And monitor if the worker is not responding. So this can be also done over the health checks. What I also recommend to configure as an alert is if a deployment failed, but you usually also see that if you have a CI/CD pipelines working, you also see it there. And then on the other hand, we have the infrastructure alerts. So if you are not fully on CloudHub and you are running it on your on-prem servers or maybe on runtime fabric clusters, you might have a lot of more possibilities which you can configure there. But this is really, I would say, dependent on the skills of the customer and also dependent on what kind of clouds or tools are used. All right, then we have the topic of logging. And I want to jump directly in two examples. On the left-hand side, I have an example of a use case where no logging framework is used, and on the right-hand side where a logging framework is used. And as you can already see is, I mean, this structure or having a logging like this is much better for troubleshooting purposes than using no logging framework at all, or maybe no common structure of your logging, right? So please always, before you implement a project, make sure that you agree on a common logging structure. It doesn't have to be as I show you here, but at least have a standardized logging because it will make your life much easier when you troubleshoot your applications. And if you aggregate all your logs in an external logging management tool, please make sure that you have it there also in the common logging framework, because it will give you really flexibility in searching for error messages or searching for other kind of messages. What we usually do, and you can also use this example, I also added the data with code here, but we usually recommend having within the common logging structure at least the application name, so that we know which application do we have the logs from, the version, the environment, correlation ID, also very important, to trace the entire transaction from experience to system API or even from the external system to the other external system. Make sure that you also pass the correlation ID between your APIs or even between your external systems so you can trace every transaction with it. The flow which is executed can be added an error message, which can be also added from the developers, a timestamp, and an additional information if needed. This is just an example on based on whatever requirements you have, you can also extend it, right? I mean, this is not written in stone, but this is, I would say, the set of properties of attributes which we recommend. You can extend it based on whatever requirements you have. The second part, which was also mentioned before in the Kahoot, was the error handling framework. And as you can see here, I mean, the first part is the logging or the standardized logging which we have. And if some kind of error happens, we should also have a standardized way how we log error messages, right? I added here again a data weave example with the error message. I usually add the code, the date name, the message, and the description of the error at the end. You can decide if you only want to propagate the error of one API or maybe even the entire trace of experience, process, and system API. But please make sure that at least you have a descriptive error message so that somebody in the operation team knows what to do out of it, right? I've seen so many examples where error messages were really completely useless. I mean, it was just, I don't know, a 500 error saying nothing in the comments. And then it is really hard for operations to basically react up on this. They need to invest a lot of time into looking all the error logs. They need to search a lot, which takes a lot of time, and we don't want to have that. So please really make sure that you have a really descriptive error messaging by using an error handling framework. All right. Then on the logging part, and this gets also quite often forgotten, and we have the possibilities in MuleSoft to set different logging levels. if you deploy onto production, please keep the logging not as verbose as possible. Really try to reduce it because you're gonna have a better performance out of it. Make sure that you don't log any critical data or entire payloads. You always have the possibility to select the debug levels in your logs. And then if you need to troubleshoot, you can then basically enable them and you see all the debug logs, but at least for the production environment, keep it as less as possible. All right, quickly checking. Still, you can still hear me. Yeah. Then we have the possibility to externalize the logs, as you probably all know. There are some advantages of externalizing the logs, right? And one of the advantage I really like is that you have the log trace from experience to process and to system API in one logging system, right? Whereas on the MuleSoft side, I mean, you can see the logs of the different applications, but you don't see like all the logs in one centralized place. And I mean, what we usually do is we externalize it in all kind of systems like Splunk, Elastic, or whatever you are using. And if you have all the logs basically in one centralized place, it gives you a lot of flexibility of searching by correlation ID, for example, or searching for, I don't know, like specific error messaging through the entire trace. You have, I mean, I just added here a few advantages. You might have a longer log retention if you are using one of the tools. You have the full end-to-end capabilities in order to search through your logs. And what I also like, I mean, I would say the big cloud providers, they also provide a lot of additional functionalities. So, for example, I know it from Google BigQuery, where you can create alerts based on the logs which you see there, right? So if you have any error message which gets shipped to Google BigQuery, you can then create your cloud functions which react on triggers and then, for example, create a case in your ITSM, so in your IT service management system. And I really like to have this possibility of out-of-the-box functionalities because you can really create this entire operational lifecycle. But nevertheless, it's always nice to have it also on the MuleSoft side because if you are developing your applications, you need at least to have one place where you can have a look into the logs. Good. Then we go back to Kahoot. I need to check what the next question is. It's a multi-selection, and I want to ask you, what are the minimum requirements on operations before going live? So you can select multiple answers. And what do you think are like really the minimum requirements on operations before you take applications to production? Is it having a health check endpoint, making sure you have a proper documentation, externalizing your logs, creating or configuring platform alerts for CPU, memory, and worker, monitoring and managing the performance of your apps, or having a proper incident management process in place. Interesting that we have now 60 seconds time. Should have configured that before. Good. Yeah, so I mean, all of the answers are imported in operations, right? this is what I meant before with this maturity model. In an ideal world, you should have everything. But I would say really the absolute minimum requirement, and I mean there can be different opinions about it, is first of all having a health check endpoint in order to check, is the applications really running? And I think most of the people also selected that. Then having the 3 platform alerts, CPU, memory, and the worker, which is also great. It's the third most answered. And then, having a proper incident management in place, right? Because somebody needs to act on the errors which you have. And then it's also nice to see that this is the second most answered one. All the others, I mean, don't get wrong, they are absolutely important, but I would say the absolute minimum are the 3 here. Cool. All right. Now, quick wrap up before we go into question and answers. I just tried to write down like some kind of a guide, which you then can use when you need to design the operations architecture. So first thing, please do not neglect operation due to go live pressure. Really important, at least before you go live, think about it, think about how you are going to handle the errors. Also communicate it to the proper teams, because if nobody is aware of it, you're gonna have messages or errors which are just getting lost. Think about operations already in the beginning of the design phase. So think about like what does operations need to properly troubleshoot, and what kind of logs do they need? Do we need to have a standardized logging? Really put you into the shoes of a colleague in operations, and then think about it. What do they actually need, and design accordingly. Always the best practice, use a common logging framework and use a common error handling framework directly from the beginning. Keep verbose logging in production to a minimum because it impacts the performance, but also the security if you are logging things which shouldn't be logged. Configure at least 3 platform alerts for CPU, memory, and working not responding, and at least 1 health check endpoint in order to check if the app is running. Always keep the operational maturity model in mind. I mean, you can start small, but keep operations really improving over the time. So it's not done only with monitoring and logging, and really think about like how can you improve the entire process. Which brings me then to the last topic, continuous improvement. So operations is never done. It's a continuous improvement process. All right. This was already the short presentation.
Really cool. Thank you very much.
I tried to keep it short, pragmatic, and focusing on the most important parts, because the topic is really, I mean, it's huge, but I hope it gave you a little bit of insight on the best practices.
Awesome. Perfect. Q&A session. And we had the first question from Pedro Jimenez. I hope I didn't said it wrong. And he was asking, while you were presenting about functional monitoring and Karate Labs, he was asking, Karate Labs, is Karate Labs something complementary to M-unit testing?
Yeah. I mean, the entire testing topic, I could probably do a presentation about this as well. And I differentiate between different testings, right? We have the unit testing, which is basically just testing the Mule application itself. And this can be done absolutely with MUnit, right? And I think it's also the best solution for it. But if we then want to do, let's say, system tests or even integration tests, so adding more and more elements to it, for example, from experience to system API or from external system to system API, in this case, Karate Labs is a really good solution because you can write your regression tests there, you trigger your experience API, and then you check basically if the response is as expected. So I see it, as you just said, complementary to MUnit, but for other testing scenarios, more in the direction of system or integration testing. Yeah. I hope this answered your question, Pedro.
Awesome. We had another question, which was from KMN, and he or she asked, we tried to use custom log4j XML file with New Relic appenders along with CloudHub appenders and saw the API is frozen due to blocked threads. And he was asking if there are any suggestions on how to mitigate such issues.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's quite difficult to answer that. We would need probably look into what is actually going wrong. There are different possibilities on how to externalize logs. I think if you properly search in the internet, a few years back, I wrote a blog post about it. There is the possibility of either using the log4j appender, but there are multiple other options how to externalize it. I actually don't know what's the problem with this appender. I would need to have a look deeper into it. So I unfortunately cannot just answer it like this. But if you are a MuleSoft customer, you can always create support cases as well. And our support colleagues are happy to help you there as well. Yeah.
Okay. Then we have another question from Maxime. When designing operations for a project that exposes APIs as a product and has a mixture of Mule apps with Mule Gateway, but also Flex Gateway APIs, how would you approach API monitoring? Not the business one, but the technical one.
Yeah. I need to read it again.
Yeah.
A mixture of Mule app, but also Flex Gateway. How would you approach API monitoring? Yeah. I mean, it depends a little bit on what you want to monitor at the end. But you have the possibility to monitor your Flex Gateway instances as well as your Mule Gateway instances, right? But maybe you need to clarify a little bit more about what you mean by the technical monitoring, or what you would like to have there in the technical monitoring.
Okay.
Yeah. Performance and errors in the external. I mean, even though you are using the gateways, you can externalize with your applications. If it's Mule applications or other apps which you have custom built, you can externalize it to any kind of tools, right? So you have the logging capabilities in the implementation part, but you also can have logging capabilities on the gateway part as well.
Yeah, Birgit just resent the link from your blog post.
Yeah.
So maybe this might. Oh.
Yeah, I can also send it afterwards.
Yeah. I think it just got removed. I don't know if it was intended or unintended. But yeah.
Then we have Hendrik. I would just like to add the value of external log aggregation cannot be overestimated. If you have a chance, do it from day one. Yeah, I agree with Hendrik, to be honest. I mean, we have our monitoring capabilities on MuleSoft, but I always recommend to have it somewhere externalized because it gives you much more flexibility into the logging, right? And I would say most of the customers, they are already using some kind of logging tools like Splunk or Elastic, and it just makes sense to have even your Mule application logs in there. Yeah. What is recommended? It log appender or platform REST APIs. Yep. I mean, maybe check out the post. I'm going to send it afterwards. I have different options there. There are always pros and cons on how to externalize logs, and depending on that, you can then decide on the best solution. If you need higher logging performance, make sure to decouple MuleSoft from logging endpoint. For example, offload to a JMS endpoint and then process the data from there. Yeah, good point. We did log a support case with MuleSoft team, but once we externalized logs, we are doing that by own risk. We got limited support with no mitigation, unfortunately. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's for me difficult to basically comment on what our support guys did. Yeah, you need to have a look with our support guys. It really depends on the case. Yeah, Hendrik sent a link. Birgit, I can't hear Andreas anymore. I don't know. It's strange.
I can still hear you, and I guess by the conversation, someone would have. Oh, working again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, are there any more questions here in the room? It's like maybe you have just.
There is maybe a question to you, Kai.
Me?
KN is asking, that's any recommendation on how to consume messages from JMS to send it to New Relic?
Oh, that depends on the case. I mean, yeah, that would be pretty much my answer, Hendrik. Is maybe you offload it to a JMS queue and build an API consuming these messages and then sending it to the externalized log system. But this would also like involve the development of an API and is also like the egg hen issue where you say, okay, but then how should I log this API, which is processing logs, which sometimes might be a little bit difficult. But yeah, one thing I want to say that that is always important that you have like asynchronous logging in your log4j when using something which is not, I would say in any case, it's like always use asynchronous logging that it will not block your working thread. But if you have like issues posting to an externalized system and this sums up like a lot of hanging threads there, then this also might be the issue. So I don't know how you have sent to New Relic via an connector or an appender from them. But you could also try if it's possible to use just an HTTP post to mitigate like maybe there's a bug inside this connector as well. So I don't know. I have actually not worked with New Relic already, so I can't say anything for sure. But these are the ways I would start investigate there, like either by sending it on a different way, or you maybe implement another logging, like a log parsing solution where you fetch the logs and afterwards send them to New Relic for investigation.
I just shared the blog post. Keep in mind I wrote it back in 2020, so it could be that some configurations are not up to date, but you get at least an idea on what is possible. But yeah, things keep changing very fast. The blog post is also already quite old. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. What else do we have on API might not work in consumer message? Push it. We will check in. Oh, okay. Yeah, so that was pretty much just an answer to the question as well. Okay, cool. I actually have to say I like the Kahoot quiz really a lot. Makes it much more interacting. We had
Yeah, sorry about the time. I don't know why the last one was 60 seconds and the others not, but I thought I configured it like this. And the problem is if I restart it, everybody needs to log in again. So I cannot just change it on the fly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, does anyone else have a question to Andreas or me, maybe? I guess I would say that's a no. No? Any good dashboarding tools? Oh, I think this question is to Andreas.
Do you mean for MuleSoft or any other tools? Yeah, I mean you can build your dashboards on Splunk or on Kibana, for example, which I have seen so far. So Kibana is basically the dashboarding tool for the Elastic Stack. Yeah, I mean I have seen a lot of configurations and custom built dashboards there, so very powerful tools. But I'm pretty sure there might be also others which I've seen. No, unfortunately, we don't have any templates for Kibana. We have the metrics toolkit. You might have seen this as well. I can send the link afterwards, which pulls the data from the Anypoint platform over the APIs. And then you can directly forward it to Splunk or Elastic, for example. And for this one, we have some pre-built dashboards, which you can directly use, but you still need to configure it based on your needs. Yeah, I know it for the metrics toolkit, but it's also very, I would say very basic and nothing very sophisticated. And for all the others, I'm not aware about anything. Yeah.
I've just posted the links, the link to GitHub metrics toolkit.
Yeah. Yeah. Just make sure before you use the metrics toolkit, and that's also a question I'm getting quite a lot, because customers they want to use it and they directly want to have it installed and see all the dashboards, which is very nice. But at the end, you need to have KPIs defined, and you also need to know on what you are measuring against, right? Because just having dashboards, it doesn't bring you any value. So what I usually recommend, have a workshop before where you define, okay, those are the KPIs which we want to measure, and maybe also indicate the success of MuleSoft or the integration platform. And based on that, you decide, okay, we are going to use this, this, and this from the metrics toolkit, or we are going to measure Jira story time. We are going to measure, I don't know, API development time with other tools or with other possibilities. So define KPIs first, and then the metrics toolkit is one way on how you can measure it.
Cool.
Yeah. Right. Then I think everybody wants to have the well-deserved evening.
I guess so, yeah. With this, I will just stop the recording right now.